Okay, so I will jump right in. So just for a little bit of background, the New York Community Trust has actually had an animal welfare program for about 30 years. We've been able to make about $2.5 million in grants with this program. If you know anything about community foundations, you know that we have many funds that are focused on specific donor priorities, and the funding that we did have was actually focused on the veterinary and humane care of the city's animals. So most of our funding for these past 30 years have gone to pretty much direct services to help the city's animals. So now we actually have new funding, and we're able to expand our grant making to support areas way beyond direct service. We completed interviews in December, and many of you were actually on those calls with us. We spoke with experts from about 16 different organizations in both the animal care and the conservation sector. And through those interviews and some conversations with others, we're able to develop priorities for this new funding. So today we're going to be talking about those priorities. So I should say that all of this information is actually in the LOI materials, which were sent out through social media as well as on our website. So there's not anything new here in terms of the information about the priorities. So our first priority is to support animals in captivity and communities. We're going to support projects that advocate and provide support to help animal care facilities follow rigorous standards of care. And this support includes training, technical assistance, and oversight. We will develop and promote certification programs that ensure the ethical treatment of animals. And this could be for care and boarding facilities or food production facilities. And we are going to hope to reduce surrender of companion animals through education on adoption, pet care and behavior training, increased access to veterinary care, and the provision of supplies and care in under-resourced communities. A little bit more about our first priority. We hope to develop innovative approaches to help animals affected by mistreatment and natural or other disasters. We hope to reduce the consumption or purchase of animal-based products that are produced through unethical, unhealthy, or inhumane practices. And lastly, we hope to offer opportunities for New York City residents, and especially focused on school children, to connect with and understand the humane treatment of animals in their communities. So I'm going to turn it over to Arturo now to go over our second priority.
Thanks, Rachel. So from bumblebees to barred owls, the wildlife that resides in or travels through the 5 boroughs faces a host of challenges, including ingestion of pesticides and herbicides, collisions with buildings and vehicles, and loss of habitat due to climate change and human activity. So in this priority, we're going to be focusing on various approaches to protecting, conserving, and helping rescuing wildlife. So we're going to support projects that advocate or conduct research to protect wildlife in New York City, including the creation, restoration, or conservation of critical habitat. We're also going to increase the capacity of the sector of the wildlife conservation, rescue, and rehabilitation sector to protect more animals. And we're going to create or expand community efforts to protect and conserve wildlife in under-resourced neighborhoods. And finally, in this priority, we're going to offer educational, citizen science, and volunteer stewardship opportunities for residents to help them better understand, appreciate, and live with wildlife. So this program is focused on the 5 boroughs. Organizations outside of New York City are eligible, but they have to have programs that predominantly serve the area and also have a history of working on animal issues here in order to be competitive. We also like to prioritize at the Trust efforts that are collaborative and collective in their approach, and that have the potential for sustained impact, such as regulatory changes or other sorts of systemic changes. And we also strongly encourage organizations that are serving underrepresented communities to apply for this funding opportunity. So the grant periods will be 1 or 2 years. Grants can range from $30,000 to $150,000 over 1 or 2 years. The maximum though is 75,000 per year for those that are seeking 150,000. So for organizations with paid staff, the size of the grants cannot exceed 20% of the organization's annual operating budget. And for volunteer-led groups that have no paid staff or have relatively small budgets, the grant can exceed 20% of the operating budget, but cannot exceed $30,000 per year. So when you prepare your LOI, it's going to consist essentially of 3 pages of narrative plus preliminary budget. The budget should be a project budget. It shouldn't be just about the amount you're requesting from us, the grant. And that budget should include the funding for equipment and supplies should not exceed 10%. And that budget should also talk about confirmed revenue and expected revenue. And finally, if the organization or the project is focused on lobbying or is going to include lobbying, the budget should talk about how much is going to be budgeted for grassroots and direct lobbying. So the call for LOIs is currently open, as you all know. The submissions are due by 5 p.m. on February 28th. The system will close down at 5 p.m. and stop accepting LOIs. So just be aware that that is a hard deadline. We will begin to review those proposals immediately and do some ask for additional information over the course of March. You should know by the end of March, either you'll get an email from us indicating that we're not going to go to the next step, thanking you for submitting, that we're not going to go to the next step, or you're going to get an email from us indicating that we're interested in getting more information and to await us reaching out to you. We plan on making 2 rounds of grants, one round to our before our June board and another in October.
And I just wanted to make one note of this. If you have any technical issues with submitting for that deadline, you can always email or give Melanie a call. She is our portal expert and she would be able to help you. I'm actually going to be out of the office that week prior, so make sure if you need to email me that you include Melanie or Arturo in any emails.
Thank you, Rachel. So now we'll open it up to for any questions, and hopefully you've got some, because we were pretty quick with this overview.
I'm going to stop sharing, but here's our contact information if anyone needs it, which is also on the LOI. And John, I see that you're asking a question. Go ahead.
Hey, hello. Good to see you all again, and thank you so much for doing this today. This is really helpful. Leadership here is considering a number of projects, and at least one of them that we think would be a good fit may have ripple effects outside the city. I guess I just wanted to ask if that is of interest. Should we include, mention of that type of thing? Like, for instance, if the pilot project is, launched in New York City, but then maybe duplicated in other cities in the US, is that kind of outside of your scope of interest, or should we mention that sort of thing in the LOI?
Arturo, do you want to take that one just because
Sure.
you're portfolio?
Thanks, Rachel. So John, the project description should really focus on what you're going to be doing in New York City, but you can talk about these broader, like a regional or even a national dimension to it. We'll take that into consideration because there are possibilities that the New York Community Trust is unique amongst community foundations, and that we also have a national environmental program. And we're about to open up our LOI funding opportunity for that national program in about a week or so. So there could be possibilities for us to put some of that national money in the mix if we choose to.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions? Alexandra. Alexandra, I think you might
Sorry,
be.
yes.
Okay, there you go.
Having problems with my mute button there. I have 2 quick questions. One, you said there are 2 rounds of grant making, one in June and one in October. What differentiates those 2 rounds?
Yeah, so if you have kind of a specific timeline, or if for whatever reason the project needs to happen sooner rather than later, but one of the things that we were thinking about is if it has to be, if it's like seasonal in terms of conservation, you know, we would take that into consideration, and you know, if that's the case. Yeah, in other cases, it's really just a matter of kind of what's in the pipeline. We don't, this is an entirely new program for us, so we're not quite sure what we're going to get in. So just in terms of our resources and ability to go through the entire review process, we don't know whether we'd be able to get everything done in the earlier board meeting. Arturo, did you want to add anything about the wildlife side of things?
No, I think that the same issues that Rachel just highlighted could pertain to something that's focusing on wildlife conservation, particularly migratory birds. I will ask, though, for folks that when you raise your hands, could you just identify your organization when you ask your question?
Oh, apologies. Yes. So I'm asking questions for the New York City Plover Project. So thank you for making that addition about migratory birds. And I hope you don't mind, I do have a second question. And it's
I just wanted to add one thing to your previous question. If there's any, if you're doing lobbying or policy making and trying to get into a specific budget, or you think it makes sense to have conversations with elected officials based on a certain timeline, that should be, you know, you should definitely articulate that in your proposal as well.
Great. Thank you.
Go ahead, sorry.
Well, yeah, so my second question is just around the grant size, and it's a point of clarification. So it says amounts will range from 30 to 150,000. However, except in the case of volunteer-led agencies with no paid staff, where grants may exceed 20%, but will not exceed 30,000 per year. So does that mean there could be grants smaller than 30,000?
Yeah, Rachel and I just actually had a conversation about this. It is possible that an organization could submit a 2-year project for 30,000, which would then end up having a smaller amount, 15,000 per year. But that's really the only instance we can think of where a grant would be, because the grant is still 30,000. So that's what we set in the request for LOIs.
Got it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And so glad to see that you all are doing this. And thank you for opening up this forum.
Thank you. Mary.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yes. Hi, thank you for this. It's really great to see these kinds of LOIs float past us. I'm Mary Cameron. I work with the Wildlife Conservation Society in the New York Aquarium. And one question I have is that the examples that you're providing, besides being domestic pets, et cetera, for wildlife, seem to be largely focused on terrestrial wildlife. And I'm wondering if you would consider also looking at local marine wildlife. I'd like to remind people that fish are wildlife too. And, you know, oftentimes they get left out of the mix of these kinds of considerations. So that's my main question.
It does include aquatic wildlife. It's not meant to be terrestrial only. We actually talk about birds. So, but
Yeah.
Yes, it's marine and terrestrial, but the most important issue is that it has to have the nexus for the 5 boroughs,
Right.
because that's the key aspect of this funding opportunity.
That's
And I
great.
should also clarify with priority 1, we were very explicit about saying companion and captive animals and not specifying pets only. So just keep that in mind, that when you're looking at that, it's not only just pets, it's companion and captive animals, and we were very purposeful with that language.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Other questions? Don't be shy.
Yeah, this is your opportunity before the 28th.
Libby?
Hi, how are you? Thank you. I'm Libby Del Greco. I also work with the Wildlife Conservation Society. I had a question about one of the lines in the RFP. It notes that one letter of interest per agency will be considered. Do you or your colleagues have any availability to perhaps consider a one-liner about multiple projects that an organization has in mind and point us perhaps in the more appealing way?
You're asking if we would have a conversation with you?
A conversation or review an email, where we might just line out a few different ideas and let you notice the most appealing way to go.
We generally don't. We generally ask that you kind of identify your priority and what is most salient for your organization. If it's either that or, you're having real trouble identifying one, we could have a conversation. It's just very hard for us to be definitive because a very brief description of a project without seeing on paper, without seeing the budget is really hard for us to make that decision. So we do ask you to try to prioritize as best as you can and identify one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Can you hear me? This is Ann Schwartz from
Yeah.
New York City Audubon.
Hi, Ann.
Hi, how are you? On hide myself, sorry. So I'm just wondering if you could clarify a little bit more about what in the RFP talked about, you're looking especially for things that are like system-wide change. If you might be able to provide some kind of examples of that or to get a little more clear idea of what exactly, how large a system are we, how large a change are we talking about system-wide? I know it's kind of a hard question to answer, but we're trying to same thing, decide between several different priorities and which one we think might be more appropriate for this particular RFP.
And Ann, you said you're from New York City Audubon?
New York City Audubon.
Okay. Arturo, can you give any examples of grants that you've supported that would be classified as systemic in that arena?
Yeah, I actually want to, if you wouldn't mind, Rachel, I want to actually focus on the issue of sort of the systems change. I think that probably generally speaking, when a proposal comes in or LOI comes in that talks about a systems change effort, that Rachel and I are probably going to look at sort of feasibility issues and that kind of stuff, and that's going to be the consideration that's most salient for us in a kind of compare and contrast way. So we're going to look at whether it's a one-year project or a two-year project, and we're gonna assess it that way. I hesitate just to pick out some systems change stuff. You guys, for example, have done some amazing work with glass in buildings to reduce bird impacts on tall buildings, and you have the recent legislation that passed on lights, on turning lights off after a certain hour. So those are great examples of kind of systems change approaches. But ultimately, I think it's probably going to be key to kind of likelihood and feasibility.
Yeah, and we do talk a lot about in the priorities about kind of capacity building and technical assistance. So what we're really looking for is sector-wide change, so that it's not capacity building for your individual organization, not hiring like one new staff person for your organization, but really thinking about whatever this capacity building is, could it be replicated and applied beyond your organization to the entire sector, so that not just the animals that you're serving benefit, but this, the entire ecosystem in New York City. So we're definitely looking for kind of those types of projects. And then, yeah, that's why we included the policy making and advocacy, so that there can be some involvement with elected officials and pushing for regulatory and legislative change. Is that helpful?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
And it's still, it's very hard to, systems change is hard. It's
System change is hard, and it's very subjective.
And it takes a long time for, for a project, you have to lay the groundwork. And even with those successes, those took many years, the legislation, and there's lots more to happen that you can't predict. When you write a grant proposal, you can't predict can we get this accomplished in 2 years sometimes, or a year? But this is
We
great.
definitely look for ambitious projects, but at the same time, we've worked in these fields and we know that that's often challenging. So we understand that there are all these other external factors that are not related to what your organization is doing. So that's what Arturo was talking about in terms of the feasibility.
Right.
So that, not pie in the sky projects, but really kind of identifying the challenges and working towards a systemic solution.
Yeah, and we
Right.
definitely look at those sorts of foundational efforts as part of that approach to systems change. And so,
Libby.
Thank you.
Hi,
Ron,
I'm from
Oh,
the New York.
sorry, Libby Post.
Yeah, it's okay. Right, that it's so rare.
it doesn't happen often. Nice to meet you.
I know, nice to meet you too. Are you Elizabeth?
I am.
Okay, I'm not. I'm not. It's Libby. It's a family thing. I'm from the New York State Animal Protection Federation. We represent all the shelters in the state of New York. And I'm on your site, and I was just wondering if you could just put the link in the chat for where we could get the LOI, because I didn't get
Yes.
anything on that.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. Melanie, can you do that? And if not,
And
yeah, I can put it in.
my other question is, can this come from a C4 as well as a C3, or does it have to come from a C3?
I believe it can come from a C4. Oh, no, my colleague says only C3. I
Only
apologize.
C3? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Do you have a C3?
Yes. And a
Okay.
C4.
Okay, then it should come from the C3.
The budget's smaller. That's the issue. It's the budget issue. So, thanks.
I have a question. I can't see the hand raising. Can you hear me?
Yes,
This
I
is
see you,
Judith.
Judith. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi there. Hi there. Hi, Rachel. I'm with the Animal Defense Partnership, and we provide pro bono legal services to animal charities throughout the US and some international. And we do have quite a few who are New York City based. We had talked about this before you launched this. So I just wanted to check in and see, now that you have a little more, clearer guidelines, to the extent that we were to apply, you would be interested only in the work that we do on behalf of the New York City based organizations, correct? Not.
Yeah, for the most part, only New York City based, although I can say if you're doing work with organizations that are based out of New York City, but the work that they do benefits city animals, that would be also in consideration. And what I'm thinking of is, a lot of work is done in Albany around kind of advocacy and legislation. So if there is work there's an organization that's working on the policy level at the state, and if it benefits New York City animals predominantly, then that's something that we'd also consider.
So, for example, we have lots of sanctuary clients who are not New York City based, but they do educational outreach all over, national and internet based. That would not, you want a closer connection to New York City, not
if
just.
They're going to serve New York, if they were going to hope to serve New York City, for us to consider them, they would have to do education of New York City residents. So I don't know if that's
Okay.
school children or do some like place-based work here, but we would really want to see the predominant target be New York City students and participants.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Yep, thanks.
Libby Del Greco, do you have another question?
Yes, thank you. In terms of budget development, I'm curious what the trust would like to see in terms of administrative or overhead rate on the costs.
Yeah, we don't have a specific amount that we're looking for. It kind of generally ranges. I would say the range goes from about 5%, maybe up to 15%. If you have a funds administrator, we have some specific guidelines on the amount that we require them to take out. But yeah, we don't have a specific number that we look for.
yeah, the bottom of that range, the 5%, is geared towards universities and hospitals and large social service that really have multi-billion-dollar budgets. That's where that 5%. So we can go up from there. in my program, Rachel, I regularly approve things that are up to 18% for administrative overhead, particularly for organizations that still maintain a bricks and mortar office, and things are evolving because of the pandemic. So that might be revisited by us in the future. Who knows?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Melanie did put the LOI in the chat, so you can see that there. Libby, you got it? Okay, good. If anyone else needs any support accessing those materials, please let us know. Any other questions? All right, going once, going twice.
Sold.
If you do have any questions as you're developing this, as I said, we cannot provide a definitive answer as to whether we're going to be able to support something or, choose for you what you think should be a priority. But if you do have technical questions or something specific about the, the logistics or the proposal, you could feel free to reach out to Arturo, myself, or Melanie. We can provide support. Okay. We look forward to reviewing everything in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
thank
Happy Valentine's Day. Hug an
Bye.
animal.
you. Yeah.